All right, so I went online and I found what's called a YAML file. It's YAML, and it's called azurevote.yaml. Now, this is a set of instructions that is going to tell the Kubernetes where to get the images to deploy an application for us. So this YAML file, I basically copied it and I pasted it into the Azure Cloud Shell. So if I close this up, I go into the Azure Cloud Shell. Now I'm using the VI editor. This also supports Nano. And we can go into this YAML file and we can see that there is a set of specifications, of course. It's going to tell you what containers it needs and how much memory to allocate to it. And if we go down a little bit, we can see that there's the back-end service that's running on port 6379. There's the front-end application that's running on port 80, which is the web server. And it's going to be using Redis as the back-end environment. And then there's a load balancer that's going to be deployed as well. Okay. So there's basically 3 services that are going to be deployed as part of this YAML file. So I'm going to, in VI, you go :X to close that out. Now I can basically tell Kubernetes, so kube control, the command is apply. And so if I say Azure Vote, and I'm going to tab that, azurevote.yaml, this is going to take the set of instructions that are deployed in this YAML file and push this out onto the nodes that are running. Now, I don't unfortunately have a course that can teach you how to write YAML, and that's going to be a whole separate thing. You're not going to be required to write YAML as part of the exam. So just simply know that you have a set of instructions that you can then use the apply command to get the container to do the instructions. So I just hit apply and you can see that the services for front end and back end have been created. That's pretty quick. Now if we go back up to, I'm going to call get nodes again. We can see that the nodes are still there. They're still in a ready state. The command that we're going to want to use is called get service. So now we can see what is running on top of those nodes. We had the 2 services, the front service and the back service. Remember, one is on 6379 and one is on port 80, and they've been up for 30 seconds. There's an external IP address in order to access those. Now, none of this is in a pending state, so it literally deployed as quickly as we showed it. The external IP address is listed here. And so if I was to go into a web browser window, paste in that external IP address, I have a working front-end application. Now, it's basically using a Redis cache in the back-end service. So I'm able to basically push a button, get a counter to increment. And I assume if I refreshed it, then the counters are remembered because it's pulling from Redis. So very simple application, and we just saw how easy it was to deploy pre-packaged code, because these are images in a container, into a Kubernetes cluster. Now, Kubernetes is not the simplest container solution within Azure, right? So we are now dealing with multiple nodes, and we're dealing with a container, and we're dealing with kube control in order to access it, and we can sort of see the complexity right here. So if this is something that's beyond what you're going to need, then we're going to have to basically get to a simpler container solution such as a web app or an ACI. Now, in a previous version of this lesson, I talked about a dashboard. So kube control, see if I minimize this and I go into the resource. Kube control used to have a dashboard, and there was even a button right off the Kubernetes page here that gave you instructions on how to get the kube control dashboard. What you used to do is you would use a AZ AKS browse command, and that would bring up a dashboard. Let me show you what happens when you do that. Now, this does not work. So there's a new service that's created, and we can see here we've got Kubernetes, and they've got a lot of great stuff in here, but we got error messages right off the top, and none of the screens contain any data. I'm going to close that down, go back up to here. Okay. So basically the AKS dashboard, it's just not the Kubernetes dashboard is not working inside of the Cloud Shell. So if you're running this in your own CLI, running on your own system, there are ways you can get around it by changing the port number that it works on, by setting it up as a proxy and then having it run on your local. But the dashboard no longer works in a Cloud Shell. Anyways, in the next lesson, we're going to do a couple more commands here in the CLI to play with our little Kubernetes cluster before we shut it down.